What is the creepiest or most unexplained thing that's happened to you that you still think and wonder about to this day? My name is Midnight Monster, and on this channel we read daily horror stories, creepy stories, unexplained stories, and stuff that'll make your skin crawl. If that sounds like something you're interested in, check out the channel and let's hop into story number 1. One night, the door to my room started creaking open, like half an inch at a time. If I would look right at the door, it would stop, but when I'd look back at the book I was reading and back up, it would be just a bit more open. Finally, it was almost wide enough for someone to walk through, so I said, "Stop it!" And as a commanding voice as I could muster, and it stopped mid-creak. Keep in mind, a 160-year-old house, everything creaked. I was almost too scared to go to sleep that night, and I know for a fact that no one in my family was home at all. Another thing was constant occurrence in my childhood. I grew up on a fairly isolated farm, with a wood that came up to the barn on one side and acres of fields between us and any neighbor. Every night when I'd finish my chores, I'd shut off the barn lights and close the door. The only light would be from a dim porch light about 40 yards from the barn, and if it wasn't too overcast or foggy, the moon and stars. Anyways, every night I'd feel something staring at me from around the corner of the barn. I somehow knew it had red eyes and was about 10 feet off the ground. I could feel evil coming from it, and I'd always run to the house as fast as I could, certain it was right behind me. I did not know what it was, and as terrified as I was, I never told anyone about it. Because honestly, my parents had a habit of dismissing stuff like that, and even as a kid, I did not want to be seen as a sissy crybaby, which is definitely what my dad would have called me. With time, I kinda got over it and figured it was an overactive imagination, combined with too many goosebump stories that caused it. That is, until about 8 years later when I'm sitting around swapping spooky stories with my friend, who grew up on the farm as well. She said that as soon as the lights were off in the barn, she felt something scary and evil staring at her, from the same corner of the barn I mentioned. I asked a few questions, and yes, she felt it was about 10 feet tall as well, and even though she never actually saw whatever it was, she was sure it had red eyes. I was freaking out, and it got worse when I asked my siblings if they've ever been scared or anything's happened near the barn. I was careful not to be asked leading questions, and every single sibling, each one had something to say. There was a scary thing that would stare from the corner of the barn when they turn off the light. I know it was just a feeling that we all grew out of, but how likely is it that we all felt the same thing from the same place? Midnight Monster here. If you've ever grown up in some rather spooky places, do drop your stories in the comment section below, as I'd love to hear it, and we're gonna hop directly into story 2. I was probably around 6 or 7, Turin, Italy. My mother, my sister, and I were at the train station about to go visit friends in Rome. My mom wanted to call her friend just to let her know our train would be a few hours late, which, by the way, is very common and there still today. She takes us to a payphone and tells my sister to hold her hand as she keeps an eye on our suitcases. I was to hold my sister's hand. As my mother's calling out of the blue, a tall man grabs my hand and starts walking. Or, to be fair, more like pulling. It was pulling me away from my sister and starts asking me questions like if I had any friends in school. I was too shocked and young and naive to understand what was going on. Panic started kicking in, and for some unexplainable reason, I started focusing on answering his questions. Then, a few feet away from the main entrance of the station, I got my other hand grabbed again. My mother's. I've never heard screaming so loud in my whole life. The man ran away as fast as speed as possible, and I could only keep staring at him disappearing in the distance, as I heard my mother cry and beg for forgiveness while hugging me as tight as she ever did. Then I look back and I see my sister pointing her small index finger at me like she's petrified, with tears in her eyes, and I read my name on her lips repeatedly, which she probably could not speak. I don't know if she saved my life or where I would have ended up if I left with that man, but I owe her everything, and as for my mom, whenever she hugged me after that, she always waited for me just to let go first. She never broke the contact before I did. I love her so much, and though I can no longer see her now, I hope she knows I always did and I always will. I'm an atheist but believe in ghosts. I had a rocking horse and a 120-year-old Victorian as a kid. We'd walk into the room and it would move slightly. Even as a kid, I'd say, oh, round horse based equals wind prone. Well, we got an upgrade when I was 7-ish with a rocking horse on springs. It was cool and I played with it in the living room for weeks after Christmas. Then my parents got tired of the god-awful sounds it made, so they moved it to our room and removed the wooden one. That night, my dad was carrying me to bed when we could hear the springs creaking like someone just sat on it. He held me for a second and then the sound grew louder and more frequent. I was panicking trying to get down, so my dad consoled me saying it was moving from the wind, like the old one. So he hit the button for the light and then opened the door. The horse suddenly violently bounced up, then the whole set launched forward a foot. Right towards us, though, someone jumped off it. I slept in the parents' room that night. This is not an isolated incident or even the scariest thing to happen in that house, but it's one I can see no logical explanation for. I can explain away the doors closing, the sounds of coughing, the time we heard a cry for Mom from the basement, etc. All can be explained as noises from outside, wind, old house radiator, etc. But explain the 50-pound horse toy moving. I worked as a night auditor at an old hotel. It was around 2 a.m. and I get a phone call from the pool room, which is supposed to be closed. I pick up the phone and answer, and all I hear is very heavy breathing. I hang up the phone and check the cameras. All the lights are on in the pool room. So I go down the hallway to kick whoever it is out, but as I get close to the glass door, it is so cold I can see my breath. The door's completely fogged over and all the lights are out. I open the door and the light above me comes on because they're motion sensor lights. I'm looking around but I don't see anything. Then the light comes on across the pool from me but nothing's there. Then every light and path begins to light up around one side of the pool as if someone's walking towards me. I ran out of there so fast and locked myself in my manager's office and stayed there until sunrise. But the worst was yet to come. I had played it off in my head as bugs causing the motion sensor lights to go off. I was telling my manager about my experience so he would get a good laugh. When I told him about the phone call from the pool, he did not laugh at all. He asked me if I was 100% positive the caller ID said the pool room. I said yes. Then he told me that there has not been a phone in the pool room for 30 years. I told him there's no way because that would be physically impossible. He told me to go look for myself. I looked. No phone. Complete and total mindfuck because I did not believe in the supernatural at all before that. But to this day, no matter how many ways I try to rationalize it, I just can't. It's completely unexplainable. Midnight Monster here. I hope you're enjoying the story so far. There's plenty more to come. If you are enjoying this content, drop a like on the video and consider subscribing. Here comes story number 5. In the summer of 1976, my husband and I went to our best friend's wedding, Jack and Nancy. We four-planned a 2-car caravan from New York to South Carolina, where my husband and I were to graduate school. The newlyweds would continue to a Disney World honeymoon. We planned on avoiding interstate highways and taking only back roads, camping or staying in places resembling the Bates Motel, or maybe giant teepees. We vowed to stop at every goofy roadside attraction and meet rural Americans because, well, we're city Brits. We were driving my MG convertible and the others coupled old refurbished US mail truck. The MG was a blast to drive, not so much the mail truck. In West Virginia, on our third morning, Jack and I were in the MG. He'd been excited to drive it, and Nancy and my hubby were behind us in the mail truck. We had the convertible top up because it felt as if morning storm might kick up. We were in a very rural West Virginia, and the only vehicles on the road, and nearly always in sight of one another, ahead lays a mile or more of straight road with no side roads or driveways. It wasn't a big hill, but it had an incline. There were fields with low crops on both sides of the road, and each side had a long, unbroken fence line. Jack saw the straightaway and asked if he could open it up. Yeah, of course, but please don't kill us. With that, he beeped the little horn, we waved and took off, quickly leaving our spouses behind. He tore up the hill and in seconds reached the crest. That very instant we reached the top of the crest and down hillside we saw a truck right in front of us. It was impossible that neither one of us had not seen it, yet we hadn't, and there it was. The 1950s one-ton pickup truck going slow. Jack swerved to the left, avoiding hitting it, and I braced myself as we started to pass. I saw a decrepit black truck with wood slat sides. Amazingly, it was filled with people. Maybe 15 of them. Looked like European peasants from another century. There were children in old-fashioned caps, young men in vests, and women of all ages wearing skirts and scarves on their heads. I sensed their faces were grim as they turned to watch us speed past, but can't say for sure because we went by them so quickly. Then, the instant we overtook the truck, we passed through a dense cloud of something I can only describe as colorful, sparkling straw dust. Organic glitter. It surrounded us, it hit the windshield, and it blew through the vents into our faces and filled the car. Briefly, this weird cloud of shining dust ruined visibility. As soon as he could, without cutting off the track, Jack pulled over to the side of the road. We jumped out, both shaking and sputtering, saying stuff like, "Jesus, what the fuck? Are you okay?" As we shook off the adrenaline rush, we stayed clear of the road because we expected the bizarre truck to pass us any second. It never showed. Logically, it should have been 20 to 30 seconds behind us at most, but it was nowhere, completely just vanished. Jack and I stood there in shock, muttering incredulities and searching the horizons for the truck. Nothing. Plus, there were no gates and fences were all broken as far as we could see. Then the mail truck pulled up right behind us and our spouses got out and said, "What happened? What's the matter? We saw you guys swerve. Did something run across the road? What's all this stuff?" Noticing the shiny dust, Jack and I were stammering and shouting, "It's from the damn truck we passed. We nearly hit those people. Christ!" Our spouses looked at us and said, what people? What truck? There wasn't anybody. What are you? We saw you swerve, then pull over. We thought it was an animal. What is all this crap in your hair?" There was still some of it in the MG, and though it had lost its sparkle, it retained a few pale colors. We told the story several times and examined the dust stuff, but did not learn anything. Both our spouses accused us of staging it for their benefit, which I admitted miffed me. And I think it did Jack too. We talked about the truck even the rest of the trip, trying to make sense of the experience. We never could. If I'd been alone, I might have questioned my sanity. Over the years, life created some distance between us four friends, but a couple years ago we did reconnect on Facebook. We talked about our kids and caught up. After the initial online reunion, Jack sent me a private message. "Do you remember the truck?" I answered, "Yes, of course, it's my biggest mystery of my life." He said simply, "Me too." I was in the hospital from a coworker hammering a board into my hand. The nail went right through my palm and they had to give me an IV antibiotic for 4 days. They had my hand strapped to an IV stand to keep it elevated. It hurt like hell, and they had me on serious painkillers, which I did not enjoy. It made me disoriented and woozy feeling. In the middle of the night, I woke up to the sound of an old man calling out for Karen. "I need Karen. I'll be alright. I just need my wife Karen here." He sounded so sad and upset, and after a bit I buzzed the nurse and asked if they could do something for the old guy that wants his wife Karen. He sounds sad and stressed. She said that they were trying to help him and she put the TV on to drown out the noise. They come in and check your vitals several times out the night and day. I kept hearing the guy, and one time the nurse woke me up and there was a bunch of voices in the hall. And after that, every time they gave me more of the painkiller, I'd hear all these different voices in the hall. Then I woke up at 3 in the morning and someone was standing looking out the window. I said, "Hello, who are you?" And he turned and said, "Oh, sorry, I must have wandered into the wrong room. I'm Henry. I'm just waiting for my wife to come pick me up." I said, "Is your wife Karen?" He said, "Yes." And I said I could hear you calling out for her the last couple of nights. "But it's 3 a.m. She won't be coming till the sun's up." He said, "I guess you're right," and then he walked out. I fell asleep again, and when the nurse woke me up at 5 a.m. for vitals, we chatted a bit, and I asked if Henry found his way back to bed. She asked me about it, and I said it was a relief he was going home. He sounded pretty rough calling for his wife the last couple of nights. We talked for a bit, and she went off to check the next patient. Later that day, the doctor asked me all about the visit with Henry and to describe him, and I did. I told the nurse he was fully dressed at 3 a.m. and some other details I could not believe the nurse put in my chart. That evening, I had a new night nurse and we had a nice chat. When I woke up at 3, I could hear a bunch of people in the hall, and I buzzed her and asked for some juice. She came and chatted with me, and I said I keep waking up from all the voices in the hall. She said, "Do you want to stretch your legs?" I said I would love to get out of bed. So, she rigged my IV so I could walk around, and when we went to the hall, there was no one there. And I was kind of freaked out, and we went back into my room. She told me she was a doctor and was studying people who she called antennas, and they were patients who usually were on strong painkillers who were picking something up, and that there was a patient called Henry who had a wife, Karen, who a couple weeks before had been in a car accident and his wife died at the scene. And Henry had kept calling out for Karen for the few nights he was there. But he passed away after a few days, and I had to give a very accurate description of him. She said over the last few years she's documented numerous cases of patients picking up on something, but she did not know what it was. Some sort of impression people in pain leave behind. It creeped me out to the core. Remembering it now, I have goosebumps on my arms, head to toe. That was nearly 20 years ago. I was nearly kidnapped as a 13-year-old with my friend. We're both females and were not developed at all. Easily looked younger than 13, probably like 11. We were walking down the sidewalk from the community pool to her house. We were wearing normal clothes, not our bathing suits anymore. The walk was maybe half a mile or so, so not so far. The entire walk was down a semi-busy 2-lane road, and her house was in a neighborhood whose entrance was on this said road. Her house was very close to the entrance, in fact. Also, on the way from the pool to her neighborhood was a field with some dense woods behind it, some other neighborhood entrances, and a few houses. We were walking on the left side of the road against traffic in the US. This van passes us on this side of the road, and shortly after, this same van is now on the other lane, the right lane, going the same direction as us. Meaning that the van passed us in the opposite direction, did a U-turn, and is now passing by us again in the same direction we're walking. At first, I assumed it was just someone who missed their turn, but I had a terrible feeling before they were next to us again. This scroungy-looking guy driving rolled down his window and politely asked where we were going. We kept walking, but I instinctively said to meet my dad at the next house down the road. He hesitated, then asked if he could give us a ride. I said no thanks, and by this point, luckily, another car was coming up behind the van. He noticed this since he was essentially stopped in the middle of the road. His back windows were tinted hell as dark, so it scared the shit out of us when another guy in the back we did not know about slid the van door open super hard. He screamed, "Get in the fucking van!" At this point, the other car was right behind the van, and they honked their horn at the van. I looked at them and must have looked petrified. The person got out of the car and asked what was going on. Honestly, I had no idea who the fuck this was either, so I did not trust any of them. In hindsight, I'm nearly certain it was just a random person who did not know these creeps. I took this as our opportunity to get the fuck from the situation. I grabbed my friend by the wrist and we started running through the field, and as soon as we did this, the guy in the van peeled off into the neighborhood on his side of the road. My friend took the lead in us running since she knew the area way more. She knew of a shortcut through the woods and we could take it into one of the neighborhoods. I turned back shortly after getting past the tree line and did not see either vehicle anymore. From there, we stumbled through the woods and cut through the side of people's yards to get through this initial neighborhood into her neighborhood, without having us to use the main road. We did not stop running the entire time, besides being slowed by branches and bushes in the woods. When we made it inside, we both just kept repeating, "What the fuck was that? What just happened? We're so lucky to be alive." Then we hugged and watched Scrubs on DVD to calm down. We did not even realize until her mom got home that we were dirty and had some cuts from running through the woods. She called her cop friend and they did find the two guys with matching description for that very specific kind of van. We never asked about them again since we wanted to forget it. I don't even know what happened. This was around 2006. Was working for my girlfriend's parents in rural Mississippi, and the local police called the family business and said they need someone to come meet them at my girlfriend's parents' house. I went with my girlfriend's dad to talk to the police because his English was not very good. We got there and there were two different officers and they asked if we were the ones who called. I told them no. We had all been at work and no one was even there. They said a dispatcher had gotten a call from the house's landline, and it sounded like someone just running and screaming and crying. Well, the house did not even have a landline. We go walking up the driveway and I see in the carport that the attic door is open and the ladder to the attic on the door is fully unfolded. At this point, we're all scared shitless. The cops included, by the way. I'm like, y'all got guns, go look up there. They legit were like, nah man, fuck that. So I tell them to give me a gun and I'll look up there myself. Of course, they wouldn't. They gave me a flashlight and I grabbed a hatchet and was ready to hack down whatever or whoever I saw. I look up in the attic and I'm screaming like a crazy person to intimidate whatever is in there, but the attic is empty. We searched around the house and all the entrances were locked. We looked for footprints and checked the woods behind the house. Went inside the house and everything was fine. Shit was weird. A week later, the dispatcher who answered the call came into my family business. She explains the phone call and it was like a teenager girl screaming, crying, and laughing. It sounded like she was running. We tried to look up the history of the house and found nothing. Well, shortly after my girlfriend's dad died rather abruptly, her mom felt weird being in the house alone and moved out with a quickness. We found out later a family moved into the house and they just abandoned the house and left town after a week. Got home late from a trip, about 2 in the morning. Had to park on a dimly lit street to get to my place. As a single female in her late 20s, I call someone when I have to walk alone in the dark like that. I call my dad, who's in a different time zone and 3 hours behind. He knows the drill and we're just chatting. As I'm walking up the hill to my condo building, there's a cluster of small trees and shrubs across the street where a fence ends and a bank parking lot begins. 2 shady guys start looking out. One is smoking. At first, I thought they were out for a smoke, then they started walking towards me. Not toward another building or car, towards me. They then separated and one is on either side of me, which I felt like I was being surrounded. As this happens, I tell my dad, which they can both hear from where they are. I have 2 guys coming towards me. I think you need to call the police now. As soon as that happened, they made a 90-degree turn and headed down the street. I still think about it often. I sometimes feel like I'm blowing things out of proportion, especially when I consider that 2 nearby residential buildings would have heard screams, and that the threat of someone calling the police on the other end of the phone wasn't much of a threat because who knows police response time. Then I go back to my gut feeling. The way that they came out of the cluster of trees, made a beeline towards me, then surrounded me in a creepy way that I can't explain, like they were in very close to an open road. I still don't know whether it was all in my head or not, but that was a terrifying experience. Since that time, I've parked in the bank lot that's well lit. I have to get up and move my car when they open at 8, but that scared some sense into me, and it scared my poor dad as well. Guys, Midnight Monster here. That was 9 stories. I hope you enjoyed the content. If you did, consider subscribing, as Midnight Monster has daily videos. Guys, have a great night.